European society in the late 19th century was peaceful, prosperous, and secure. Although many of the problems of industrialization and urbanization continued to make life difficult for working-class people, their opportunities also expanded. New discoveries and ideas caused revolutionary changes in the sciences, and scientific approaches were applied to the study of society and human behavior. Writers, painters, and musicians explored new forms of artistic expression. Now, you will learn about the progress and discoveries made in late 19th century Europe, as well as the dangerous forces that were steadily developing. European society has many contrasts. Their industrialization advances rapidly. Their pace setters were steel, electrical, and chemical industry. Chemists developed synthetic dyes, chemical fertilizers, and medicines. The Great Britain was the earliest country to industrialize, and they also led the textile production. Then the Europeans moved to cities. While the northwestern Europe was already urbanized, the eastern and southern Europe were still agricultural. Their technological and medical advances bring population growth. There were numbers of scientific discoveries that help people in general to live better, healthier lives. In 1800, the total population on Europe was 190 million, and in 1914, it was already 480 million. And because they need a large amount of food to supply their needs, the railways and steamships transported large quantities of grain from the US and Russia. They had new methods of refrigeration and canning. They also have advances in medicine, and new knowledge about the cause of diseases. Sanitation was also improved. As I have stated, scientists worked to prevent diseases. Like Edward Jenner, an English country doctor, who found the first method for preventing smallpox, a disease that killed many people. He made a solution or a vaccine that contained cowpox germs because he noticed that those people who had experienced cowpox seemed not to get smallpox. Louis Pasteur, a French chemist, who discovered tiny organisms called bacteria that were cause of many diseases. Realizing that bacteria could be killed by heat, he invented pasteurization, a process of heating milk to make it safer to drink. Another scientist, Robert Koch, he began to experiment with bacteria. And in 1882, he found the cause of tuberculosis, a common illness. By finding the causes of diseases, both Koch and Pasteur made it possible to prevent or cure many diseases harmful to human beings and animals. Joseph Lister, an English surgeon who used antiseptics to kill bacteria in hospital rooms and on surgical instruments. After learning about scientists and their discoveries, we are going to talk about the improvements of life of miners and other workers in the society. The lives of miners and other workers improved because they can already afford to buy meat and eggs more regularly and to purchase clothes, shoes, and other mass-produced goods. They have already enough time to spend at sports, music halls, and other things. They also improved their ways in working. The German government began to provide benefits for sick and elderly workers. On the other hand, their public education becomes widespread. In 1900, most of the European countries requires children to attend elementary or primary schools. Despite the spread of public education, there were still workers who only finished primary school. It is about 92%. In terms of their social class, Europeans were greatly aware of their differences. Aristocrat family dominated the upper ranks of army, and they led the positions in the government. Peasants and workers faced difficult conditions, since they also made up the lower class of European society. Although there were improvements in the ordinary people's lives, their working conditions were still difficult. In France, Western Germany, and Australia, some peasants owned enough land, while in other parts of Europe, only few peasants owned enough land. They live in bleak, overcrowded tenements, usually without central heating or running water. Tuberculosis was still the major cause of death. Their working hours had been reduced 72 or more hours a week. But in Netherlands, the sales clerks work 82 hours a week, and were not permitted to sit down during their working day. Safety in factories also improved, but their long hours and damp and airless buildings caused workers' health to deteriorate. Because of their daily contact with toxic substances such as lead, arsenic, mercury, and zinc. But despite the difficulties of their lives, European workers had gained more political power, as right to vote was brought in. The modern age of science begins. Science knowledge increased tremendously in late 19th century in Europe. This improved living conditions and better health. At the same time, knowledge and new theories about universe. We are going to talk about physical science. Basic discoveries of some scientists lead to modern chemistry. People believe that all matter was made up of 4 elements: fire, air, water, and earth. They conducted more experiments about these 4 elements, including Joseph Priestley was a teacher who conducted a science experiment about air. He found that the air was not a single substance, but a mixture of gases. He shared his discovery with a French chemist, Antoine Lavoisier. He named gases in the air, like nitrogen and oxygen, and showed that fire is not a substance, but a chemical reaction. From his experiment, Lavoisier and his co-workers named many other elements, and made the first table of chemical elements. Lavoisier was also the founder of modern chemistry. He was also a politician. Another scientist is John Dalton, an English chemist and mathematician teacher. He worked out a theory about the basic structure of matter. He said that each element consists of tiny, indestructible particles of matter or atoms. According to his theory, all the atoms of one element are alike, and they are different from the atoms of other elements. Moreover, the atoms of various elements are combined in certain ways to create different substances, like carbon dioxide. Dmitry Mendeleev, a Russian chemist, who helped chemistry to make more systematic and mathematical. In 1868 he devised a table that classified elements according to their atomic structure. In the year 1895, physicists explore matter and energy. Wilhelm Röntgen, a German physicist, discovered a new form of electromagnetic waves. He named them X-rays, X meaning unknown. And it soon began to use in medicine, and in a variety of experiments. Another physicist, Henri Becquerel, a French scientist, in 1897, he found that the mineral uranium gives off high-speed rays or radiation, similar to X-rays. He shared his study to Marie Curie, and to her husband, Pierre Curie, and they found out that other minerals also gives off radiation. Such minerals are said to be radioactive. Let's go back to the study of atoms. Joseph John Thomson, a British scientist, discovered a smaller particle with the atom. It was given the name electron. After these discoveries, physicists now began to investigate the inner structure of atoms. In 1911, scientists described the atom. Ernest Rutherford, he is a student of Thomson. His model looked something like the solar system, where there is something in the middle, and that is nucleus. It was surrounded by electrons in orbits. Another scientist is Niels Bohr, a Danish physicist. He stated that electrons spin around the nucleus in certain orbit. When an electron jumps from one orbit to another, a burst light is given off. In 1900, Max Planck showed that energy was released in short bursts or quanta. After those experiments and discoveries, a revolution occurs in physics, since not all scientists agreed with those findings. Just like Albert Einstein, a brilliant German scientist, he published a scientific theory that forced people to reconsider the orderly universe. Einstein's theory of relativity. According to Einstein, the only way to describe the motion of a moving object is to compare it with another moving object. Therefore all motion is relative to some other motion, and to the observer. He also relates matter and energy. His formula is E is equal to m multiplied by c squared. Means mass and energy can be converted into each other. After learning about discoveries in physical science, we are now dealing with the scientists and their discoveries in natural science. Jean Lamarck, he is a French scientist who made a study of plants and animals. He suggested a theory of evolution, that living things change in ways that allow them to live more successfully. Then geologists study Earth's history. And James Hubble, a Scottish geologist, stated that Earth's surface was the result of gradual changes occurring over vast periods of time. Charles Darwin develops a new theory. Darwin was a naturalist on a ship named Beagle. He observed unusual species of plant in the coast of South America. He believed that all living forms, including humans, evolved from earlier forms of life that had first existed 1 million years ago. He published his book, On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. But it was opposed by some religious thinkers who viewed the theory as a rejection of the account of creation of life written in the Bible. After Darwin's theory, Gregor Mendel begins to work on inherited traits. Since Darwin didn't explain how differences develop between one generation and next, he conducted experiments with pea plants, crossing yellow peas with green ones. He led to the discovery of genes which carry such hereditary traits from parents to offspring. And that is the start of science of genetics. After physical science and natural science, you will learn about social science. Sociology is the scientific study of human society. It was invented by a French philosopher, Auguste Comte. It was adopted later by Émile Durkheim and by Max Weber. And since we're dealing with science, historians apply the scientific method. Leopold Ranke insisted that historical writers should study primary sources and tell what actually happened. Psychology seeks the cause of behavior, and they also adopted methods and ideas of science, and some psychologists began systematic research and experiments. Their first laboratory was in Germany by Wilhelm Wundt. After learning about modern science, discoveries, and some scientists, we are dealing with artists and their contributions in 19th century in Europe. Artists seek new ways of expression. Painters experiment with light and color. In the year 1860, a group of painters in Paris began to experiment with showing their impression of an object. They look at objects outdoors in bright sunlight, and tried to capture how movement, color, and light appear to the eye in a fleeting instant. The leaders of this group were Edouard Manet, Claude Monet, Camille Pissarro, Edgar Degas, and Pierre-Auguste Renoir, Marie Cassatt, and 2 Americans. They were called Impressionists. In 1880, Paul Cézanne, a French artist, showed objects as patterns of forms and flat surfaces. This is what we call post-impressionism. Music also follows traditional forms. Johannes Brahms, the most influential composer, who carried on German classical tradition in orchestral music. Other musicians were Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky and Sergei Rachmaninoff. They were known for beautiful melodies and rich orchestral sounds. Other composers were Edvard Grieg from Norway, Antonin Dvorak from Bohemia, and Modest Mussorgsky from Russia. Giuseppe Verdi is famous for such operas as Rigoletto, La Traviata, and Aida. Johann Strauss is the younger. He was called the Waltz King. He created popular Viennese style of dance music in the 1870 and 1880. Richard Wagner created music dramas. At first, audiences and other musicians disagreed violently about his music, but because of his approach to harmony and his way of using the orchestra, he influenced all those who followed him. Another artist is Claude Debussy from France, who tried to create music impressionist painters were attempting to canvas. Arnold Schoenberg, he is from Viennese, and he experimented with a totally new structure for music. Another is Igor Stravinsky from Russia. He is the most influential composer, and he used some Schoenberg's ideas, along with rhythms and ideas from jazz. Next, we are going to learn about European literature. The European literature strives for realism. The writers were known as realists, and later known as naturalists. They wanted literature true to life. Their stories reflected social problems, and dealt with the everyday lives of ordinary people. In this time, many best-known novels of Charles Dickens were published. His books were rich in both humor and tragedy. It also showed conditions in the factories and cities of industrial England. In contrast with Dickens, the novels of Mary Ann Evans and Thomas Hardy pictured life in rural England. They explored more about relationships between people. Another writer is Gustave Flaubert, from France. He described the life of middle-class French woman in his novel entitled Madame Bovary. Émile Zola, who is a supporter of modern trends in both painting and literature. Some greatest masters of realistic fiction were Russians, like Ivan Turgenev, wrote of the dignity and earthy wisdom of Russian peasants, while he is Anton Chekhov. He portrayed middle-class country life in plays and short stories. Fyodor Dostoevsky, he probed the inner feelings and motives of the characters he created. Count Leo Tolstoy, he showed the rich background of Russian society in his War and Peace, in 1866. After talking about artists, musicians, and writers, we are going to talk about dramatists. Because modern drama develops. The characters in modern drama were ordinary people who spoke in everyday language, not in poetry. One example of a dramatist is Henrik Ibsen, a Norwegian dramatist. He shocked audience with his honest pictures of family tensions. The Irish playwright and poet, William Butler Yeats, led a new school of Irish drama. While George Bernard Shaw, from Ireland, became the Britain's leading playwright, with his witty plays and criticism of society. Drama in Russia flourished at the Moscow Art Theatre, led by Konstantin Stanislavski, which opened in 1898, with Chekhov's play, The Seagull. Political forces threaten Europe's stability. In this time, national power becomes an overriding goal. Nationalism had been identified with movements for freedom. It led oppressed people to seek independence from foreign rule, and gave people who shared similar traditions a feeling of community. In Germany and in Austria, some students and intellectuals regarded democracy and concern for individual rights. They adopted the ideas of German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. In his writing, he declared that a leader must be a superman, a hero who followed no rules but his own. At the same time, extreme nationalists seek to dominate other people. Extreme nationalists claim that the right to rule over all lands and people that, they said, rightfully belong to their nation. They believed it was their duty to acquire more lands. Extreme nationalists embrace racist doctrines. One of the greatest dangers of extreme nationalist was its adoption of racism. It is the notion that one racial or national group is superior to others. Extreme nationalists in a number of countries began to attack minority groups, claiming that those people were not only inferior, but also enemies of national unity. You learn about Charles Darwin and his discoveries in previous topics. His ideas are applied to the society. Since Darwin had set forth a theory, offering explanations in the field of biology. Herbert Spencer, he was an English philosopher, and he tried to apply Darwin's theory of evolution to all fields of knowledge, including sociology and economics. Spencer's theory is called social Darwinism. He attracted many followers in Britain and in the United States. Social Darwinism spread the ideas into racist thinking. They claim that those who were better fitted for the struggle for survival would become rich and successful. They were called the superior races. The poor were seen as those who were unable to compete. They were called lesser people. After those happenings, racist thinking becomes widespread, and it became an increasingly powerful force in the late 19th century. Since we are talking about superior races and lesser people, it was said that German people were descended from ancient superior race, the Aryans, people who settled in India. Houston Stewart Chamberlain, an English writer who became a German citizen, he claimed that Germans were physically, morally, and intellectually superior to other people. And because of these ideas, German nationalists insisted that they had the right to dominate inferior races. And after these, European Jews faces long-standing prejudices. Anti-Semitism, or hatred of Jews, was an attitude with a long history in many parts of Europe. In Black Death, in 1348, Jews were accused of poisoning wells to kill Christians. Mobs humiliated, tortured, and massacred Jews. And the Jews were forcibly converted to Christianity and expelled from their land. Jews were also forced by the law to live in ghetto, a section of town set aside for them, since they were separated from other people. Ideals of Enlightenment and French Revolution resulted in legal equality for Jews. They could leave ghettos and participate in many activities. But then, anti-Semitism remained widespread and Jews were blamed for a variety of social and economic ills. Anti-Semitism spread the myth that Jews were concerned only with money. Therefore, Romania barred most Jews from voting and holding office. They restricted their admission into universities and secondary schools. They also permitted and even encouraged pogroms or acts of violence against Jews. Hundreds of villages were burned, and their people murdered. So in 1896, Theodor Herzl suggested the idea of a separate homeland, where Jews would be safe from persecution. And this movement was known as Zionism, and it attracted considerable support. On the other hand, German anti-Semitism included nationalist idea. The small Jews population in Germany had many contributions to German economic and cultural life. But the German racists claimed to offer scientific proofs that Jews were physically and spiritually different from other Germans. And in 1900, anti-Semitic organization had declined. However, many Europeans still kept the image of Jews as a threat to the nation.